Chapter 71, Chapter 68, Mind Games. Oberyn didn't have to look for long. Just in the room next to his, two gold cloaks were enjoying wine while two girls sat on their laps, and one of them was belting out the lyrics to the Rains of Castamere at the top of his lungs. Perhaps because of the wine, or perhaps the company, they didn't notice the man who slid open the room's doors until he was already inside. One of them looked him up and down before adopting a smug, condescending expression. To men of the Westlands, Dorne was a land of peasants and bastards, nothing like the elitist hills of the crag or the splendor of Casterly Rock. "Lost, are you?" he asked, as if he had found a particularly repugnant pest. "Forgive my rudeness," Oberyn replied in a measured and polite tone, though with a provoking smile. "We don't see many Lannisters in my land. We don't see many Dornishmen in the capital either," the man mocked. "We don't like the smell," Oberyn replied, his smirk full of scorn. Suddenly, Ilaria entered the room, followed by the brothel's manager, trailing after the unpredictable prince. She took Oberyn by the arm, trying to talk him down. "Gods, look at that woman," said the other soldier, who had remained quiet so far, his eyes devouring Ilaria. "Why waste her on a Dornishman? Give her a bottle of oil and a goat." The two men burst out laughing, but everyone else in the room wore a serious face. The prostitutes, who had been sitting on the soldiers' laps, recognized the signs. They immediately got up and scurried away. Ilaria, who had been holding Oberyn's arm just moments earlier, let go. Even she didn't take insults to her homeland lightly, and a prince of Dorne certainly wouldn't either. Oberyn smiled pleasantly as he walked slowly toward the soldiers' table. "Do you know why everyone hates the Lannisters?" he said, more to himself than to them. The two men stood up, tense, expecting trouble. But Oberyn went on. "You think your gold and your lions make you better than the rest," he said, eyeing the swords resting against the table. "But want to hear a secret? You're not better than anyone, you're just a pair of very slow men with your swords." Everyone in the room was completely still, bracing for the inevitable. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Oberyn needed only the smallest excuse. Killing Lannisters right in the capital, knowing they could do nothing about it, would bring him more satisfaction than the most exquisite orgy. The tension broke abruptly when a deep, theatrical voice echoed through the room. "How right you are!" A tall, blonde, muscular man entered as if he owned the place. He wore only a fitted silk shirt and leather trousers, his hair tied back in a loose ponytail. He watched the scene with clear amusement. The brothel's manager rushed forward to get him out of there. The situation was bad enough without some drunken noble adding to the chaos. "My lord, this is a private room." He couldn't finish the sentence before the man simply gestured toward his face. "Sleep," he said in a dull voice, and the boy collapsed to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. The whole thing felt unbelievably surreal. Oberyn, who seconds before had been ready for a fight, now felt a knot of unease in his stomach. Something about the situation felt profoundly unnatural. Ilaria also seemed unsettled, by the man's appearance, but more so by his apparent ability to put someone to sleep with a single word. "They think they're better than everyone," the stranger said, but this time with a persuasive, almost hypnotic tone. Even though every part of Oberyn screamed that something was wrong, his mind insisted everything was normal. Even when the man literally dissolved into mist and reappeared behind the frozen Lannisters, the scene still felt perfectly acceptable. "Two pieces of arrogant, condescending trash," he muttered as he grabbed one of their chins, examining him like a specimen. Oberyn nodded involuntarily, as if he agreed with every word. "I bet they're monsters too," the man went on. "Maybe they were here during the sack of King's Landing? What do you think, Oberyn?" "Yes? Bastards. I should kill them," the prince replied like in a trance. "Exactly. Let's kill them," the stranger declared, placing his hands around the men's necks. But then Ilaria snapped out of it. She shook her head forcefully and rushed to rouse her husband as well. "Oberyn!" She shook him hard. The prince broke from the trance instantly, disoriented. But as the full weight of the situation settled over him, he grasped the danger. He moved Ilaria behind him, shielding her with his body, then questioned the man through gritted teeth. "Who are you? What did you do to us?" Vlad rolled his eyes. They had ruined all the fun. The truth was, he had come to the brothel on a whim, after watching those same men beat a beggar boy within an inch of his life. He wasn't exactly a saint who would save every unfortunate soul, but he also wasn't going to let these bastards enjoy their night of wine and whores. And his encounter with Prince Oberyn, whom he knew had arrived in the capital that afternoon, was a golden opportunity to make a memorable impression. "Oh, come now, Oberyn. Don't be like that. It was just a little family joke," Vlad said with a smile. "Family?" Oberyn asked, confused. "On my wife's side, of course," Vlad shrugged. "And who is your wife, my lord?" Ilaria asked, calmer now. The stranger didn't seem hostile toward them. Vlad's smile turned predatory. "Daenerys Drackle Targaryen." The Dornish couple's eyes widened. They immediately recognized the man who had inspired so many tales. "The Impaler Lord," Oberyn murmured, and his expression shifted into a defiant, jubilant smile, as if meeting this legendary monster in the flesh was a cause for celebration. In the flesh and blood, Vlad gave a theatrical bow, grinning. He already had the feeling he'd get along well with Oberyn Martell. The way the man stared back at him with open challenge made it clear he would be great entertainment. Chapter 72, Chapter 69. Monsters with Manners. Apparently, the whole situation had stopped feeling dangerous and turned into a social visit. Vlad had simply knocked the two Lannisters unconscious before tossing them into a corner of the room like sacks of potatoes, and Oberyn and Ilaria served themselves wine as if nothing had happened, watching his movements with interest. "So, what's the terrifying Lord Impaler doing in the capital? Shouldn't you be bathing in virgin blood and eating babies?" she asked playfully. Vlad practically rolled his eyes as he sat down on a cushioned window seat. "Damn priests. They come up with the least creative stories," he muttered, annoyed. The Faith of the Seven had done its job of alerting everyone about the monster looming over Westeros, most likely paid in Lannister gold as revenge for the massacre at the twins. "Are you denying the baby part?" Ilaria asked with mock innocence. "Ilaria!" Oberyn feigned scandal. "Don't interrogate our distinguished guest like that. Although..." His smile turned wolfish. "Now that you mention it, please," Vlad said, feigning indignation. "Virgins are best enjoyed in other ways, and babies are only pleasant when they're yours," he added with a laugh. Ilaria swayed her hips deliberately as she walked over and sat on her husband's lap. "Well, about babies," she said while pouring more wine and letting her hand graze Vlad's, "I prefer making them to taking care of them. That part has always been the most fun to me." "Darling." Oberyn placed a hand on his heart. "Are you flirting with my political relative?" "I'm just exploring potential strategic alliances," she replied with a feline smile. Vlad watched the exchange with amused exasperation. Oberyn leaned back in his seat, eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and sarcasm. "So tell me, Lord Impaler." He pronounced the title with a mocking grin. "What brings you to this rotten city? Come to enjoy our hospitality?" Vlad accepted the cup with a grateful nod. His lips curved in amusement. "Call me Vlad, please. Lord Impaler is far too grandiose," he said, taking a sip of wine. "And I came for the wedding, of course. The event of the century, isn't it? An arrogant king, a resigned bride, wine everywhere. Blood guaranteed." "You expect blood?" Ilaria asked, tilting her head. "I don't expect it," Vlad replied softly, "but I'd be disappointed if there wasn't any." "That trick you pulled earlier?" Oberyn asked, curious while twirling his dagger. "What the hell was that?" Vlad waved his hand dismissively, like brushing away a fly. "Oh, that. Just a little mind game, almost a parlor trick. Nothing a man of your insight couldn't grasp." "Magic?" Oberyn insisted, now frowning slightly. "I studied what scraps I could find at the Citadel. But that didn't look anything like what you do. Those idiots wouldn't recognize real magic if it burned their feet. They're too scared of it," Vlad said with scorn, though he noticed Oberyn still looked unconvinced. "Really?" He raised an eyebrow. "In a world with dragons, faceless men, and skin changers, you doubt magic?" Ilaria let out a soft laugh, amused by the growing tension. "The difference is, you're scarier than a skin changer," she said. "And I won't believe in dragons until I see one." "Oh, you will," Vlad replied with a strangely tender smile. "In fact, my wife is meeting with your brother right now. You'll be hearing from them soon enough." Oberyn narrowed his eyes. It wasn't a threat, but still, he worried for his brother. "Good luck to your wife trying to negotiate with Doran," he said, chuckling. From what he knew, Daenerys was a petite woman with a reputation for being kind. Vlad laughed openly. "I'd worry about your brother. As you'll learn one day, my wife is pure fire." Oberyn studied him, trying to read between the lines. But he seemed to change the subject as Ilaria offered him a sip from her cup. So what are you then? A blood mage? A skin changer? Vlad looked him straight in the eyes, his expression calm but firm, as if savoring the mystery. Let's say, I'm a man on a mission. And what mission is that? Oberyn asked, genuinely curious. Vlad looked at him while sipping his wine. His reply was serious and direct. Peace in our time. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of possibilities. Finally, Oberyn raised his cup. To monsters with manners, then. And to snakes and poison, Vlad replied, clinking his cup with a soft chime. Oberyn stood with his wife and extended an arm in a grand gesture. Well, since we're here, he proposed with a lascivious smile. How about spending the afternoon with us? Wine, good company. He gestured to the women still in the room, and all the delights this place has to offer. I'm not interested in whores, Vlad said simply, though with a tone laced with amusement. And if you want to make sure Sunspear doesn't turn to ashes one night, I'd avoid offering me prostitutes in front of my wife, even if she's across the sea. Ilaria and Oberyn laughed heartily, but they didn't understand Vlad wasn't joking. I'm sure we can find activities to enjoy together in the capital. If not, we could take you as our guest to the wedding, Ilaria suggested with a smile. Oh, that won't be necessary. I have a wedding invitation, Vlad said, pulling out a golden scroll. But sadly, they got my name wrong. What a shame, he added playfully. Oberyn burst out laughing. Please, don't stray too far from us. Otherwise, it'll be unbearably boring. No worries, I feel the same. In fact, allow me to invite you to dinner, Vlad said, standing and motioning toward the door. And what about them? Ilaria asked, pointing at the two soldiers and the poor pimp still lying on the floor, fast asleep. Vlad shrugged. The boy will wake up in a few hours after the best sleep of his life, he replied, then gestured to the soldiers. As for them, they'll die. And the bodies? Oberyn asked, slightly uncomfortable with the idea of leaving two corpses in his favorite brothel. Vlad gave a smug smile that both Ilaria and Oberyn found equally attractive. What bodies? He asked innocently. Both Dornish looked toward the corner where the men had been, and found nothing, even though they'd been there just seconds ago. Oberyn looked at him, clearly impressed, then chuckled. Okay, now that trick you'll have to teach me. Chapter 73, Chapter 70. Inviting a vampire to dinner. The dinner took place in one of the less formal halls of the Red Keep. The Prince of Dorne had adamantly refused to let Vlad invite them outside the palace. According to him, the best cooks were already there, and it made no sense to complicate something that was already working. The hall, spacious and adorned with carved columns, was lit by a large window that let in the light of the setting sun. Oberyn had chosen it for convenience and privacy. There were no musicians or jesters, only the sound of wine and the quiet murmur of servants. At that moment, Vlad was not Vlad Drackle. His appearance had changed completely, becoming almost a reversed shadow of himself. His hair and beard, once blonde, were now black, and his yellow eyes had turned a pale blue. His name was Lookhart Teeps. He had chosen it more out of whim than necessity. He simply couldn't resist the irony. According to the story he had crafted, he was a knight from Volantis who had won several tournaments in Westeros before becoming a mercenary. And the best part was, all these events were properly documented for anyone who cared to look. At first, he had planned to attend the wedding as a bodyguard to one of his progeny, who had dealings with the Lannisters, but the encounter with the Martells had given him a better excuse to move closer to the center of power. Oberyn and Ilaria were surprised at first by his change in appearance, but they understood the secrecy. After all, Vlad was officially an enemy of the crown. And still, the dinner proceeded without incident. Ilaria spoke freely, sharing anecdotes from her travels along the Rhoyne. Oberyn added details and laughed with that lightness so characteristic of him. Vlad remained silent at first, but eventually joined in with brief, sometimes blunt remarks that brought smiles to Oberyn's lips and glances from Ilaria. They talked about wine, music, pleasures, and wars, always wrapped in a thin veil of irony. Vlad firmly rejected the couple's suggestive hints for a more intimate encounter, but rather than being offended, they seemed amused by his refusals. They treated it like a game they still believed they could win. The dinner was peaceful, without the stiffness of official banquets. Everything was going well. In fact, Vlad was enjoying the couple's company. As a monarch, he rarely found people he could call friends, but Oberyn just might be one, if circumstances allowed it. But unfortunately, peace never lasted long in King's Landing. Just as they were calling it a night, a sharp knock echoed through the double doors of the hall. A visibly flustered Tyrion Lannister made his entrance, his face flushed and hair disheveled. He had spent the entire day tirelessly searching for the Prince of Dorne. "There you are, Prince," he said, bowing his head with a mix of exasperation and relief. "The crown has sent envoys all day to welcome you formally. I even began to fear something had happened to you." Oberyn raised his cup in a gesture of false sympathy. "My humble apologies, Lord Tyrion. The distractions in this city are irresistible." Tyrion's eyes landed on Vlad unlookered with curiosity, but he asked no questions. "The king sends his regards, my lord. And the Lannisters as well." "How kind," Oberyn replied, pointing to an empty chair with the tip of his dagger. "Join us. The wine is Dornish, but I promise it won't bite." Tyrion shook his head. "I only need a moment of your time. In private." An awkward silence followed. Elaria brought her cup to her lips to hide a smile. Vlad remained impassive, enjoying his wine with feigned indifference. "As you wish, my lord," Oberyn conceded, rising to his feet with deliberate grace. "But don't keep my new friend waiting too long." He emphasized the words as he guided Tyrion to the door. "Lookard has fascinating stories. He spent years working in Essos." Tyrion cast one last look at Vlad before following the prince. The door closed softly behind Tyrion, who walked alongside Oberyn through the corridors of the Red Keep, away from the hall where Elaria remained waiting. As their footsteps echoed against the cold stone, they headed for a small study, where the light of a single lamp illuminated the walls. Once inside, Tyrion turned to face Oberyn, his eyes fixed, awaiting the prince's words. "Very well," said Tyrion with a sigh, taking a seat and trying to relax. "Sorry for tearing you away from such pleasant company," he added in his usual mocking tone, but the prince only stared at him in silence. Tyrion nodded, uncomfortable at seeing Oberyn unwilling to exchange jests, so he decided to follow protocol instead. "The king greatly appreciates your long journey to attend his wedding," said Tyrion in a flat tone. "We'd best speak plainly," replied Oberyn with a grimace. "Joffrey feels insulted. After all, I'm only the second son." "Well, from one second son to another." Tyrion let out a bitter half-smile. "I grew up used to being the family's disgrace." Oberyn laughed without humor. Seeing that his attempt to ease the tension had failed, Tyrion grew more serious. "Why have you come to King's Landing?" "I was invited to the royal wedding," Oberyn replied with a shrug, feigning indifference. "Weren't we going to speak plainly?" Oberyn remained silent for a few seconds, staring out the window. When he spoke again, his voice dripped with venom. "The last time I came to the capital was many years ago," he began, his voice heavy with restrained anger, "for another wedding. My sister Elia's, to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." He paused briefly, just long enough to regain control. "My sister loved him. She bore his children, dressed them, cradled them, nursed them. Elia wouldn't let the wet nurse touch them. And the handsome and noble Rhaegar," he spat the words with contempt, "left her for another woman, started a war. And that war ended right here, when your father's army took the city." "I wasn't even present," murmured Tyrion quietly. "They butchered those children," Oberyn went on, eyes fixed on some invisible point, as if reliving the scene. "My dear nephews, hacked to pieces and wrapped in Lannister cloaks." He slowly turned to face Tyrion. "And my sister? Do you know what they did to her?" Tyrion lowered his head, unsure whether out of shame or respect. "I asked you a question," Oberyn repeated, his voice burning with anger. "I've heard rumors," Tyrion replied, not looking up. "So have I," said Oberyn, and this time his voice was as sharp as a dagger. "There's one I hear again and again. That Gregor Clegane the Mountain raped Elia and cut her in half with that great sword of his." "I wasn't there," Tyrion repeated weakly. "I know what happened," Oberyn said with conviction. "If the Mountain killed my sister, then your father gave the order." Tyrion remained silent. The tension in the air was palpable, but he couldn't find the right words. Oberyn's rage was so raw and direct that he couldn't contradict it, especially when he knew it was true. Not firsthand, of course, but he didn't doubt for a second that his father was capable of such a thing. Oberyn decided it was time to end the conversation. "Tell your father I've arrived," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "and tell him that the Lannisters aren't the only ones who pay their debts." Tyrion nodded, saying nothing more, and rose slowly from his seat. He knew there was nothing else he could add. A few minutes later, when Tyrion returned to the dining hall, Oberyn offered one final courtesy. "A cup of wine?" offered Oberyn, though his tone made it clear it was mere formality. Tyrion returned a slight nod in recognition of the gesture, but his reply was quick and firm. "No, I must take my leave. The night is wearing on, and I have other matters to attend to." With one last glance at Oberyn and Illyria, Tyrion withdrew again, leaving Vlad alone with them. The door closed softly behind him, and the atmosphere in the room returned to its earlier calm. Oberyn had lost his good humor, but the wine and Illyria's presence seemed enough to soothe him. As for the conversation with Tyrion, Vlad had heard every word, one of the perks of vampiric senses. Besides, he had no doubt a full transcript would be delivered to his bed that very night, courtesy of one of his progeny. They continued drinking and talking for a few more hours, until darkness overtook them, and it was time to end the evening. Before parting, Vlad offered to accompany Illyria on her walks through the castle and gardens as her personal bodyguard. A cover, of course. Oberyn gladly accepted. It was the perfect excuse for Vlad to move freely through the Red Keep and spend the entire day with them. Chapter 74, Chapter 71. Plans and Spies. The dinner with Oberyn had passed, and the preparations for his stay at the Red Keep were underway. It only took a few words from the Prince of Dorne to have a modest room assigned to him within the castle walls. The quarters were spacious, though not as luxurious as those reserved for the great lords invited to the wedding. The stone walls, covered with faded tapestries, barely managed to conceal the austerity. A large brazier kept the room warm and perfumed with oils, though it failed to fully banish the smell of the city, which seeped in whenever the windows were opened. What Vlad hated most about the city was that damn stench. He cursed the Targaryens for not properly planning their capital and made a mental note. He would build a proper sewage system, most likely using the unnecessary network of underground tunnels the old dragon family had left behind, and perhaps even raise an aqueduct like those of ancient Rome. That would solve the problem. The bed, made of dark carved wood, was comfortable, and the linen sheets were clean, but everything lacked the typical luxury of a noble house trying to maintain appearances. Perhaps that was simply how things were usually done, but Vlad was more inclined to think that the beloved Queen Mother had explicitly requested that the Dornish visitors be deprived of any luxury. In fact, it sounded exactly like something she would do. Soon, he realized that his hosts weren't the only ones paying attention to him. The maids who brought him clean clothes or lit the lamps lingered longer than necessary, casting glances at him that wavered between curious and lascivious. Whispers ran through the halls. "The knight from Volantis," they said, "with hair as dark as night and manners fit for a prince." Vlad listened to those whispers with mild irritation. Being a vampire meant being, by nature, the ultimate male specimen, a built-in evolutionary mechanism to attract prey. Blending in among maids used to obese nobles was a problem, but perhaps it was something he could use to his advantage later. At night, when the keep fell into silence and only the murmur of water beneath the walls broke the stillness, his spymaster would slip into his room to bring him the day's news. Lena moved with the grace of a moonlit fairy. She wore little more than a few fine layers of silk, a crimson tunic so light it barely covered her immaculate skin, her hair loose, and her lips painted a dark red that seemed to beg to be bitten. She approached her lord with sensual movements, sinking to her knees beside him, while he, unbothered, remained seated in an armchair, reviewing transcripts of the correspondence flowing in and out of the castle. "My lord," she whispered, brushing his leg with one hand and letting her cleavage settle at his eye level. "I bring the news you requested." Vlad did not look up from the parchment, but in a flat, polite tone he greeted her. "You are as beautiful as ever, dear Lena," he remarked without even glancing at her. "But I already told you, there's no need for you to deliver the reports yourself. A servant could handle it." A spark of frustration lit up in Lena's eyes, but she preferred to respond sweetly. "It's safer this way, my lord, and more intimate," she purred, dragging out the words as she raked her eyes up and down Vlad's body. Vlad didn't even bother to argue. "Proceed then," he signaled. The former courtesan almost felt insulted, but more than anger, she felt an even greater desire to conquer the prize that was Vlad. A pity it was a task almost as difficult as conquering Westeros itself. "The boy king grows increasingly irritable, my lord," she began, letting her voice take on a nearly lascivious tone as she pronounced his title. "He has killed several maids and whores, ordering the guard to deal with the bodies. The rumors haven't erupted thanks to Cersei, but it grows harder by the day for her to contain the little monster," she added with a smile. Vlad raised an eyebrow, interested. He understood that without his favorite doll, Sansa, whom he was quite pleased to have taken from him, the boy poured his sadism onto prostitutes and serving girls, killing them or leaving them barely alive after his games. In truth, this served Vlad's plans. The more rumors that circulated about the king, the fewer problems there would be when the time came to kill him. Good. Make sure the rumors spread among the common folk. I want everyone to know the king is a monster before the wedding ends, Vlad ordered, looking into the eyes of the beautiful woman kneeling beside him. Lena slid her hand to the edge of his knee in a slow caress, trying to spark some interest, but Vlad didn't move. He didn't even blink. What about Tywin's less beloved son? Vlad asked with a hint of irony. The dwarf is struggling, she continued, now speaking more formally after realizing her game was ineffective. After a trip to negotiate the loan with the Iron Bank, he hasn't been entrusted with any major responsibilities, and he's having trouble keeping his whore hidden from his sister's eyes and ears. And Varys? Vlad asked, as if Lena's hand wasn't stroking him. He said nothing but Cersei suspects. It won't be long before she delivers the news. Vlad nodded slowly, his yellow eyes gleaming with interest. He was curious to see whether events would unfold as he remembered, or if his presence would alter the course of history. What about the old lion? Vlad pressed. Tywin is in constant contact with Dorne, she replied, settling obediently at his feet like a cat. The correspondence has intensified. Tywin wants to secure the alliance before you, or anyone else makes a move. Predictable. I'll have the pleasure of disappointing him, Vlad murmured with disdain. Also, Lena added, teasing the hem of her tunic provocatively, winter is already making itself felt in the north. Without southern grain, the north will soon have to bend the knee or starve. Excellent, Vlad declared, deliberately ignoring the proximity and blatant provocation of his spy. Make sure our merchants do business with the north. I want them well-fed, but make it clear they must stay on their side of the neck. Anything else? Lena bit her lower lip, weighing whether it was worth making one last attempt to seduce him, but Vlad's coldness was unshakable. She lowered her head in submission. Not for tonight, my lord. Vlad stood elegantly and, without looking at her, spoke in a low tone. Prepare yourself. When I leave, you'll have 2 weeks. I want every coastal stronghold waking up without ravens. Not a single message must escape before it's too late. Lena smiled, this time with genuine admiration. That was her true love, the brilliant and lethal mind of her lord. As you command, she whispered, looking up at him like one might look at an untouchable god. Thus the night passed swiftly. Truth be told, control over King's Landing and its various sectors was relatively small. It relied mostly on deals with Littlefinger and hefty donations to the High Septon. But in terms of spying, Vlad was unmatched. After all, who could escape being spied upon by someone who could turn into mist? At the very least, Vlad knew all the secrets of that disgusting city. The morning arrived, cold and clear. Vlad rose before the first call of the servants and dressed simply. He chose a light tunic appropriate for a private meeting, adorned only with a simple embroidery of dark threads. He was to have breakfast with Oberyn and Ilaria, as they had agreed, in one of the Red Keep's inner gardens. The meeting was brief and cordial. They shared fresh fruits, warm bread, and a light wine, keeping the atmosphere relaxed. Oberyn, of course, invited him to join him at the royal breakfast, acting as his bodyguard, thus sparing himself from the boredom of the ceremony. Chapter 75, Chapter 72, Royal Breakfast. The royal breakfast was a grandiloquent and tedious ceremony, where most of the nobles invited to the wedding gathered to eat while the king received gifts from his family and future in-laws. Apparently, the bride's presence was not allowed, for reasons Vlad had not bothered to understand. Most likely, Lady Olenna should have been there, but in all certainty she had declined as politely as she could and sent her beloved son in her place. One of the palace's inner courtyards had been prepared for the occasion, filled with headdresses and silks adorning floral arrangements and fountains among the gardens. A long table crowned the courtyard, occupied by the royal family and Mace Tyrell, followed by several dozen tables where nobles from all over Westeros sat while eating appetizers and drinking wine. Vlad sat at a table beside Oberyn Martell and Ilaria, who spoke quietly about the dull customs of the Northerners. To Dorne, everyone except themselves were Northerners. Mace Tyrell was the first to rise from the table, advancing with ceremonious steps as 2 servants carried an object covered by a velvet cloth. On behalf of House Tyrell and the people of the Reach, Your Grace, he announced reverently, I have the honor of presenting you this wedding chalice. May you and my daughter Marjorie drink from it and live long. Joffrey smiled kindly, giving his future father-in-law a cordial look, something uncommon for the cruel bastard. Vlad was almost certain he had killed some girl the previous night. It was the only plausible reason for his good mood. "A beautiful cup, my lord." He leaned forward slightly, smiling. "Or should I call you father?" Mace flushed with emotion, nodding like a dog. "It would be an honor, your grace," he replied immediately. As the presentation went on, Shay appeared among the servants, filling wine cups. Despite all his efforts, Tyrion had not managed to hide her in his chambers without her being noticed, so he had no choice but to place her as a kitchen maid. Normally, that kind of servant would never be seen, but not at a ceremony like this. Cersei, seated beside Tywin, did not miss the chance to point her out in a low voice. She had long sought a way to harm her brother, and had recently discovered Tyrion had become far too entangled with that whore. Something she would happily tell her father. "She's the whore I told you about. The dark-haired one," she whispered, without taking her eyes off the young woman. Tywin barely raised an eyebrow, his face as stone-faced as ever. To him, it was nothing more than another of Tyrion's attempts to shame him. "Bring her to the Tower of the Hand before the wedding," he dictated coldly. It was not long before Tyrion stood. His squire, the loyal Podrick, carried a large, richly bound book, which he handed to his lord so he could present it. Joffrey arched an eyebrow, clearly disappointed. "A book?" he spat, barely holding back his disdain. Unfazed, Tyrion adopted a diplomatic tone. "The Lives of Four Kings," he explained, "the chronicle of Grand Maester Caith on the reigns of Daeron the Young Dragon, Baelor the Blessed, Aegon the Unworthy, and Daeron the Good. A book every king should read." For a brief instant, silence fell over the garden. Joffrey seemed torn between his impulse to mock the gift and something else. At last, he forced a polite smile that unsettled Tyrion. "Now that the war is over, I must find time for learning," he said pleasantly. "Thank you, uncle." Suspicious, Tyrion frowned as he returned to his seat, unable to take his eyes off his nephew. Joffrey being courteous was never a good sign. Then, one of the gold cloaks stepped forward, carrying a sheathed sword in a luxurious scabbard topped with a gleaming golden pommel. Tywin rose slowly, with all the dignity of an emperor. "One of the two only Valyrian steel blades in the capital, your grace," he announced, "newly forged in your honor." Joffrey's eyes lit up with childlike excitement. Without waiting, he rushed to the guard and unsheathed the sword with an exaggerated flourish. The blade shone in the morning light. Grand Maester Pycelle hurried to warn him in a trembling voice. "Careful, your grace. Nothing cuts like Valyrian steel." "So they say," Joffrey remarked with a twisted smile. With brutal swiftness, he spun on his heels and, to the astonishment of many, began tearing apart the book Tyrion had given him. Each strike was clean, and pages flew across the garden. Tyrion barely flinched at his nephew's cruel tantrum. This was far less disturbing than watching him act kindly. A cruel laugh burst from Joffrey's throat. "Every great sword must have a name," he proclaimed, raising the blade high. "What should I call it?" The answers came from among the nobles attending the breakfast. Stormbringer, one ventured. Wolfslayer suggested another. Widow's Wail, a third proposed. Joffrey let out a dry laugh, savoring the last suggestion. "Widow's Wail," he repeated with delight. "I like it. Every time I use it will be like cutting off Ned Stark's head all over again." A cruel smile spread across his face before turning into a grimace of anger as he remembered how Sansa Stark had slipped through his grasp. He had hanged several Kingsguard for their incompetence, which only slightly eased his rage. But he would have loved to remind the little red-haired bitch that her family's ancestral blade now belonged to him, before splitting her in two with it. Even he, however, knew better than to ruin appearances, so he drew a deep breath before sitting back down to resume his meal. The chatter in the garden was interrupted by the silent arrival of a servant, who approached Tywin and whispered something in his ear. The Lannister patriarch frowned slightly, but rose with dignity. "I will receive him in the Tower of the Hand," he said in a low voice, lifting his cup. But the servant raised his voice to add, "The envoy brings gifts, my lord, from a foreign king." "A foreign king? And with gifts?" He laughed. "Let him in. Let everyone see how even across the sea they must pay homage to my greatness." Silence fell over the table for a moment. Cersei straightened, glancing at her father. This had been too sudden, and she disliked it. Tywin, however, remained impassive. Mace Tyrell looked scandalized at such a breach of protocol, but seeing the king accept it, he merely nodded. The servant withdrew, and after a few moments, a middle-aged man entered, clad in a grey robe trimmed with silver, the sigil of the Iron Bank embroidered upon his chest, escorted by 2 gold cloaks through the gardens. "Your Majesties, Highnesses, my lords," he said with a slight bow without servility. "I am Tibero No, envoy of the Iron Bank of Bravos," he explained, then added in a diplomatic tone, "As an institution, we pride ourselves on being neutral, but above all we are officials who offer our services. Thus were we generously compensated to personally deliver these gifts." He paused briefly before continuing. "They come from His Majesty Vlad Dracul Targaryen, King of Meereen, who wishes to extend his greetings to the royal house of Westeros, and expresses his hope that you may soon meet in person." The announcement rippled through the garden with a murmur. Every noble in Westeros knew, at least by rumor, of the Wild King of Essos, the man who had wed the last Targaryen princess and even managed to hatch dragons. Many secretly hoped that this new king would march upon Westeros and seize the throne from lions and stags alike. But that same dreaded king, who impaled his enemies by the thousands, sending gifts. No one had expected such a thing. Some glanced at Tywin, but Joffrey, seemingly oblivious to the implications of a face-to-face meeting with Vlad, burst into a scornful laugh. "Come then, show us the gifts. What has the savage across the sea sent?" he said with satisfaction, making a gesture. Tybero raised a hand, and his attendants opened a large wooden chest, richly decorated. From within, carefully folded, emerged 2 cloaks. For His Majesty Joffrey Baratheon and for Prince Tommen. Cloaks worthy of their noble lineage. The cloaks, exquisitely made, gleamed with golden embroidery and patterns of symbols that enhanced their splendor. A note accompanied the garments. Joffrey snatched it and read aloud with arrogance, basking in the attention. "May your reign be remembered in song, your name written in letters of gold in history. For a king, gold is his emblem. Gold shall be his crown, gold his shroud. But the love he inspires shall endure forever." The court seemed quite impressed by the gifts. Even Tywin's expression was complex, weighing the implications of such a gesture. Tyrion's mind, meanwhile, raced for an explanation that did not herald tragedy. But the offerings appeared to be a show of goodwill. The only one who seemed displeased was Cersei. The words of the short note stirred in her memory an old prophecy she had longed to forget, and a shiver ran down her spine. But Joffrey remained blissfully unaware, laughing with haughty delight. "This Vlad may be a savage, but he knows how to give fine gifts." He laughed harder. "Even he knows I am destined for greatness." Tybero did not react. Instead, he signaled for a second, smaller case to be brought forth. For Princess Myrcella, to be delivered personally to her honorable residence in Sunspear. A veil of the finest silk from Ass-High. And this note. He unrolled the parchment and read solemnly. "To the purest jewel of the realm, who, wherever she may be, shall inspire love and loyalty." Cersei's face softened slightly. For an instant, the mother within her overcame the queen. But only for an instant. Then came a third gift. A crossbow of ebony with golden fittings, sober yet elegant. "For Lord Tywin Lannister," the envoy announced, "and a note as well. May your hand be steady." Tywin spoke no word. He took the weapon with calculated composure, examining it like a craftsman judging the quality of a tool. Then he set it carefully at his side. The next gift drew many gazes. A hand mirror of refined design, its border carved from crystal and mother of pearl. A rarity. A true mirror of the kind almost no one in Westeros possessed. Cersei took it and read the inscription engraved upon its edge. Her eyes traced the phrase, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" The queen closed the mirror without comment. She merely set it on her lap with slow, measured movements. No one dared ask. To her, and to all of Westeros, it seemed a line appealing to the vanity of the supposed most beautiful woman in the realm. Only Vlad would understand the irony of the ominous message. At last, Tybero presented a small lacquered wooden coffer with ivory trim. He handed it to Tyrion, who opened it with caution. Inside lay a thick golden bracelet. For the master of coin, Tyrion Lannister. The dwarf raised a brow, skeptical. For someone to show him respect was a novelty, but for gifts to be prepared for him on par with his family was a miracle. The bracelet rested atop padded lining that filled the chest. Yet as he moved it, Tyrion noticed something more. The inner padding had shifted during the journey. Beneath the fabric lay a silver pendant. A simple jewel, delicately wrought, with a folded note beside it. He opened it carefully. It read only, "For that beloved one." Tyrion said nothing. He smiled faintly, taking the accident as a fortunate oversight, perhaps destiny itself. That his family had not seen the pendant was a blessing. They would not recognize it should someone wear it. He already knew to whom he would gift the pendant. He pocketed the jewel and shut the coffer. Chapter 76, Chapter 73, Unexpected Encounters. Meanwhile, Vlad observed the ceremony from one of the tables alongside Oberyn and Ilaria, who were simply drinking to pass the time pleasantly. The table assigned to the Dornish delegation was placed right in the center of the hall, flanked by the entourages of Casterly Rock and the Reach. Not so far as to be an obvious insult, yet its location spoke for itself, visible enough so that no one would forget their presence, and marginal enough to remind them they were not essential. Oberyn noticed it, of course. He had noticed it the moment they crossed the threshold, and now, with a cup of wine in hand and a sharp smile, he cast Vlad a look full of irony. "Do you know what I enjoy most about these feasts, Lookard?" he said with a casual tone, using his false name, watching how no one here enjoys themselves. How the food tastes blander and the company deplorable, as if it were a competition to see who can handle a silver spoon better. Vlad held his cup without replying at once. Instead, he calmly observed the lords who laughed, toasted, and whispered at other tables. Almost all of them pretended not to look toward the Dornish table, but their eyes kept returning again and again. Some curious, others cautious, and a few openly hostile. "That's politics. That's why I hate it," he finally replied. "The Lannisters, even if they did not wish to treat you with contempt, must do so, for appearances." Oberyn shrugged at the remark, then added with irony, "Is that what this is all about? Appearances?" he asked with disdain. "You'll have to be more specific," Vlad retorted, shrugging with feigned innocence. Oberyn gave a short laugh and poured himself more wine. Then, without lowering his tone, he murmured, "Why send gifts to your enemy? Did you poison them?" Vlad arched a brow and twirled the cup between his fingers. "Do you really think me so uncreative?" He answered softly, "Poisoning a king at his wedding would be vulgar." And then, Vlad looked at him for a second before setting the cup on the table and replying seriously, "Tywin Lannister genuinely believes he is untouchable. And indeed he was. But with me here the game has changed. He does not know it. He still clings to the old certainty that his gold and influence protect him. That's why it doesn't seem strange to him that I wish to negotiate. So he will lower his guard. And thanks to that," he smiled faintly, "I will make him bleed." Oberyn observed him for a moment, intrigued and amused. "Sometimes I forget you are not from Dorne." The conversation ended with elegance, as often happens between men like them. Around them, cups were raised, laughter grew louder, and musicians resumed their melodies. Attentions dispersed, and little by little the lords began rising from their tables. Some headed toward the gardens, others to the inner hall. Vlad finished his cup, letting the wine slide slowly down his throat. The atmosphere had grown heavy, not because of the heat, the hall was spacious and the windows open, but because of the many eyes fixed on him. Courtiers, and above all, meddlesome ladies. Too many gazes. In Essos he never had the same problem because there he truly inspired fear, and few thought it wise to be bewitched by his appearance. But here, in Westeros, under another name, it was common, and irritating. Without a word, he rose from his seat. He walked between the marble aisles, ignoring the murmurs that followed him, and crossed a side gallery that led to the rear garden. The air there was fresher. A faint scent of blooming flowers mixed with that of orange trees, and the murmur of water drifted from a fountain adorned with a statue of Joffrey, carved standing triumphant over a dead wolf, holding a crossbow in his hands. Vlad almost let out a laugh. The boy, at least, had imagination and a sense of humor, because in reality, even stringing a crossbow would be a challenge for the scrawny bastard. The ivy-covered walls and the shadows of the hedges created a cozy corner, far from the bustle. Vlad sighed and sat on the fountain's edge, letting the silence surround him. Then, without warning, a soft weight settled onto his lap. He looked down. A young tabby cat had made itself at home with the familiarity of one who claims what is his. It curled up with a gentle purr and raised its face, expecting caresses. Vlad tilted his head, both amused and intrigued. He lifted a hand and, slowly, stroked its back. The animal purred even louder. "You're brave," he murmured softly, "or too foolish to know whose lap you've chosen." "He's not foolish," said a child's voice at his side, "just friendly." Vlad barely turned his face. Of course he had heard the child's breathing among the hedges, but pointing it out suddenly might have startled him. There, standing with hands clasped and a timid yet curious gaze, was young Prince Tommen. "Forgive me, sir. My cat doesn't usually do that. I didn't mean to bother you," Tommen said, approaching shyly. Vlad smiled at the boy's tone, polite and respectful. It was evident that whatever had corrupted Joffrey into a cruel bastard was not present in his younger brother. This boy could be a sensible and malleable king, and therefore more useful. It was no bother. He's a calm creature. "In my land, there are no cats like this one," Vlad replied, petting the animal without lifting his gaze. It was true. In Essos, any creature unable to defend itself quickly became food. "And where do you come from?" Tommen asked, leaning forward. "From Essos. I was born in Volantis, a very old city beyond the narrow sea," he finally answered, his voice serene. "Volantis?" The boy seemed excited. "I've heard there are enormous temples there. And sorcerers." Then he glanced around before whispering, "They also say the Impaler Lord lives in Essos." Tommen lowered his voice as if sharing a secret. "They say he's a monster. They say he cannot die, that he drinks blood, and that he has dragons." "I've heard those stories," he said, playing with the words, "though I never saw him in person." "And do you think they're true?" He leaned closer, intrigued. "That someone can live forever? And the dragons?" "Dragons are not tales, Prince," he announced with a laugh at the boy's tone. "I once saw them, flying over the skies of Pentos. They are majestic." The boy's eyes widened, fascinated. But then Vlad returned to the earlier question. "And we can all be immortal, little prince," Vlad murmured, gazing at the fountain as if in reflection. For him, speaking of immortality was easy, of course, but his words had nothing to do with sharing his supernatural gifts. "Truly? The legacy we leave behind will live long after our bodies are gone." He paused, then looked at him gently. "If you wish to live forever, make sure the world remembers you." Vlad knew that if Daenerys were there, she would laugh at the hypocrisy of his words, charming the poor child when he himself possessed the true key to immortality. But Vlad did not share his gift with just anyone, least of all with a child. "Like my brother? He's the king. He'll be remembered," the boy said, resting his gaze on Joffrey's statue. "Perhaps he will," Vlad followed his eyes, "but one does not need to be a king to leave a legacy. When you are lord, you may be a good lord. A just one. A generous one. That will make thousands remember you fondly. Forever." The boy seemed thoughtful, staring at the grandiose and ridiculous statue of his brother, until soft footsteps echoed among the columns. Cersei appeared with a frown and a firm voice, flanked by 2 gold cloaks who shadowed her every move. "I don't often see Dornish knights so close to my children," she said in the tone of one who finds a rat in her chamber. "What is your name?" Vlad looked at her for a moment. The woman was beautiful in her own way, but her eternally irritated face spoiled all of it, as if breathing the same air as others were an offense. He knew that Cersei, at that moment, was paranoid and irritable at seeing her power slip away to Marjorie, and that anxiety only fed the old prophecy that tormented her. But Vlad would not fall into her game. He stood with elegance, took Cersei's hand and kissed it with courtesy. Cersei, however, felt unsettled. At any other time, the touch of a Dornish knight would have offended her. But with this man, the gesture seemed perfectly natural. Though something about the situation felt strangely uncomfortable, she waited for him to introduce himself. "Lookard Teeps, your grace. From Volantis, now in service of Prince Oberyn Martell." He bowed slightly. "Forgive my boldness, your grace, but the young prince offered me a far more stimulating conversation than most men at this feast." Cersei withdrew her hand with subtlety, without the faintest smile. She countered with her usual venomous tone. "Do you enjoy speaking with children?" She spat, hoping to break his composure. "At times, children say what adults do not dare," Vlad replied, unperturbed, "and this young one has a sharp mind. Surely like his mother." The disguised flattery unsettled her, but she kept her poise. Too courteous for a cell's word. "You claim to come from Volantis? Some important house, I imagine?" "Not at all, your grace. Prince Oberyn only hired me because I am unmatched in combat," he answered with feigned humility. "Unmatched?" A sharp laugh. "Did the good Prince of Dorne expect trouble? Isn't it the most prudent course, your majesty?" Vlad glanced toward Joffrey's statue. "The roads are treacherous, and the capital, even more so." "True," she observed him with distrust. "Accidents happen all the time. That is why I'm here. To prevent them," he smiled briefly. And can you? Her tone lowered, more threatening. Can you prevent the accidents of the capital? Without a doubt, he said without losing composure. If you wish to prevent accidents, it would be best to stay away from my children. Unless you wish your stay in the capital to become more permanent. Her voice was cold and firm. Of course, Your Grace. I would not dare. He looked at her calmly. Mother, Ser Lookard was very kind. Tommen interjected with a timid smile. He spoke to me of legacies. He said one can live forever if they are remembered. Cersei looked at him briefly, then turned her eyes back to Vlad. I thank you for the lesson, Ser Teeps, she said, every word sharp, but princes have proper masters for such things. Of course, Your Grace. I shall keep that in mind, he bowed serenely. She turned with a swirl of her gown worthy of a stage play, dragging Tommen along. Vlad watched them leave, analyzing every detail. Unbalanced, paranoid, irascible, perhaps a disorder of the mind like her son, or simply the strain of being queen. It didn't matter. This small exchange had confirmed that with Cersei Lannister there was no room for reasonable negotiation. Vlad already knew her personality, of course, but witnessing it was different. He wanted a clear idea of the lions before deciding whether to use their hides as rugs, or if it would suffice for the right person to take control. But one thing was certain. Almost the entire adult generation of the Lannisters seemed to be obstacles Vlad would be more than willing to remove. At the same time, in Dorne, the heat of Dorne was different from that of Meereen. Not scorching like the open plains, nor humid like the coasts, but dry, lingering. Daenerys felt it on her skin, and was sincerely grateful for her new nature. So able to enjoy the pleasure of the sun without it being bothersome. She no longer sweated, no longer tired. It was pleasant to dress however she wished without worrying about ending the day with her gown drenched in sweat. One of the many things she owed her husband. The water gardens were a wonder, and not only for their design. Delicate shadows stretched from palms and flower-covered pergolas, while fountains spilled into small channels that ran through the paths. It was easy to get lost there, among the perfumes and the music that sometimes drifted from a terrace. But what surprised her most was the people. In Dorne, everything seemed to be lived with unusual freedom. Gazes were open, sometimes brazen. Women praised her as easily as men, and more than once someone had offered her company. Both men and women, sometimes together. She found herself in a dilemma trying to explain, more than once, the concept of fidelity, which the Dornish not only seemed not to understand but frankly considered absurd. After all, how can there be infidelity if your partner also takes part? She only smiled. An enchanting, ethereal smile that captivated more than one, and more than one woman. If anything about her new nature bothered her, it was how striking her appearance had become. She had always been beautiful, she knew. But thanks to her awakening, she now possessed a beauty that could drive men to war just to see her smile. Unfortunately for the world, she belonged to only one. Even so, she could not help but think how much her men must be enjoying this culture so hospitable. Truth be told, even Grey Worm had been unusually quiet since they arrived. May the gods save me if Dario decides to stay, she murmured to herself, walking down one of the polished stone corridors. It had been 3 weeks since their arrival, and Dornish courtesy had been impeccable. But she had yet to receive a reply from the Prince of Dorne, nor the requested visit from Myrcella, though there was still time. Daenerys only hoped Doran would not make any foolish mistake. It would be a shame to reduce Sunspear to ashes. Meanwhile, she passed the time as best she could. Each morning at dawn, she trained in the inner courtyards with her sword, not with the reckless violence of an unskilled warrior, but with the agility and calm that Vlad and Ser Barristan had instilled in her. Her style of fighting was eye-catching. She relied on her extraordinary reflexes and supernatural agility to execute acrobatic, near-impossible moves, emphasis on near. Vlad had repeated many times that she should keep her feats within human limits. He wanted to avoid people seeing them as anything more than human, at least for a few years. Besides, he had said that staying close to the human would keep her mind more grounded long enough to adapt to immortality. In the afternoons, she returned to practice with the flames. Sometimes it was only a spark between her fingers. Other times, an orange sphere that floated for a few seconds before fading. Her progress was slow but steady. The blood now running through her veins carried power. She only needed time to understand it, and time was the one thing she would never lack. Chapter 77, Chapter 74. Hired Fools. The sun was setting over the walls of Sunspear when Daenerys stepped into the training yard. Her hair was tied back, and she wore light clothing that hugged her curves while allowing her to move freely. In her hand she still held a letter, its broken seal bearing the emblem of House Drackle. It was merely an update on events in the capital. Spy reports, Vlad's movements, all meant to keep her informed so she could negotiate with Doran accordingly. She tucked the letter beneath her leather belt and walked to the center of the yard, where her blood riders were already waiting. Talon was stretching his neck, and Karen held a practiced sword, paying little attention to the small crowd that had begun to gather, servants, squires, and a few Dornish soldiers, all watching in silence. Their training sessions had become something of a spectacle, though Daenerys barely spared them a glance. She picked up a practiced sword, tested its weight with a quick twirl of her wrist, and stepped in front of Talon. No one gave the signal. The training simply began. Talon moved first, his downward strike swift, but Daenerys did not meet it with force. Instead, she slipped aside with just a twist of her hips, letting his blade cut only air. Karen came from the left, trying to block her escape, but she dropped low, rolled between them, and rose behind them in one fluid motion, sword raised high. Steel clashed, and the sound filled the air with every strike. Talon swung in wide arcs, relying on reach. Karen pressed with sharp thrusts, trying to corner her. But Daenerys danced between them like a flowing current, impossible to catch, each turn and dodge executed with clean precision. A servant dropped a bucket of water when she bent backward to avoid a slash by mere inches, her hair brushing the ground before she pushed off from that position, spinning to strike Talon's knee with her heel. He only staggered slightly, but it was enough to open a gap. Daenerys turned again, deflecting Karen's attack with two quick moves, using her blade to redirect his strike before launching a counter straight at his shoulder, which he barely managed to block. It wasn't truly a fight, it was a game, one that made all three of them smile. As vampires, physical effort was a distant memory. They had to restrain themselves constantly. This was one of the rare moments where they could let loose, even if only a little. Daenerys kept moving swiftly, dodging with rolls, slipping like a snake between their strikes. She did not use her vampiric strength. She did not fly, did not vanish into shadows. When she finally struck back, she was quick, hitting Talon on the thigh, then on the wrist, disarming him in one motion. Karen leapt in at once, relying on the strength of his torso, but she shifted with her shoulder, turning to strike at his side. Karen caught the blow just in time, countering with a downward slash that would have struck her head. But Daenerys dropped low, rolled beneath his swing, and rose again with her sword pointed at his throat. Karen smiled, proud. There was no shame in being bested by his Khaleesi. They tried again, first one at a time, then both together. With each attempt, Daenerys answered with agility, never brute force. The murmurs around the yard grew, some servants hardly blinking at the sheer display of skill. Two young women in leather armor, better equipped than the rest, watched from the shade of the yard. One, with dark hair braided, held a spear as she wiped sweat from her brow with a damp cloth. The other, shorter-haired, leaned against the wall, spinning a dagger between her fingers. "Look how she moves," the braided one remarked with a grin. "I already like her. Remind me again why we can't approach her?" "Because being a bastard is not the best for diplomacy," the other replied, rolling her eyes as if they'd had this conversation countless times. "Do you think she's as good in bed as she is with a sword?" she added, staring shamelessly at Daenerys's backside. The other girl sighed, exasperated, and chose to ignore her sister. From another corner of the yard, a deeper voice rose, kind but tinged with arrogance. "A beautiful show, but I doubt dancing like that will serve you in a real battle." It was a tall man with a neatly trimmed dark beard, Ser Aaron Corgyle, a minor relative of his house, known for his loyalty to Arianne. He stepped forward at an easy pace. He did not truly seek trouble with Daenerys, but causing some in her name would surely make the Princess of Dorne smile and, with luck, might even earn him her bed. Or so he thought. Daenerys did not answer at once. She only looked at him calmly. The man was average in every way, from his physique to his expression. He inspired nothing in her. "Would you like to try it?" she asked, pointing toward the rack of practice swords. "I am sure my lord could give me a proper lesson in the art of combat," she added with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Ser Aaron smiled, convinced he had achieved his aim. "Gladly. And if you enjoy my instruction, perhaps you might accept private lessons later," he said, in a tone embarrassingly obvious. There was muffled laughter from the youths behind him. Daenerys gave no reaction, only stepped to the center of the circle, raised her practiced sword, and waited. Ser Aaron strode forward with confidence, taking up his weapon with theatrical gestures. Then he attacked quickly, seeking to unbalance her or even cause harm, but he never touched her. After the first thrust, every blow missed by an inch. Daenerys did not strike back. She only evaded, just as she had with her Blood Riders, though now without the slightest effort. The tension on Ser Aaron's face grew with every passing second. He tried thrusts, feints, tricks. None worked. Finally, after a clumsy attempt at a direct charge, he made a poorly calculated thrust. Daenerys spun, struck his wrist, disarmed him, and with a final turn knocked him to the ground, her blade's tip at his throat. The man lay sprawled, battered, his lip bleeding, humiliated. It seems clear that if you are as skilled with the sword as with everything else, I would find your private lessons rather disappointing, she said, her voice calm, a smile of triumph on her lips. Ser Aaron clenched his teeth as laughter swelled around him, but he did not dare reply. Daenerys was already walking away. For her, the day's business was finished. That was when a guard approached with measured steps. Your Grace, Princess Myrcella has arrived. She awaits you. Daenerys nodded, and Missandei offered her a towel to wipe the dust and dirt away. After preparing herself, changing into a white silk gown and gathering her hair into an elegant ponytail, she left her chambers to meet Princess Myrcella. Chapter 78, Chapter 75. Masquerade. The evening breeze drifted through the open balconies, carrying the scent of orange blossoms. Daenerys waited by a marble fountain, dressed in a simple, flawless white silk robe. The meeting wasn't formal, but that didn't make it any less significant. She had requested that Princess Myrcella Baratheon be brought to her inner chambers, far from the palace's bustle, and more importantly, from curious ears. Myrcella entered accompanied by 2 Dornish handmaidens but dismissed them with a timid smile as soon as she crossed the threshold. She wore a modest linen dress in a pale shade, with no jewelry save for a golden ring on her right index finger. Upon seeing Daenerys, her large green eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected her to be so young, so beautiful, or so real. Your Grace, she said, with an awkward, hesitant curtsy. It's an honor. I must confess, I'm a little nervous. Never thought I would speak with you. Daenerys observed her silently for a moment. The girl seemed to be trembling. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her lips barely quivering. But her eyes. You have no reason to fear me, Princess, Daenerys replied gently. I'm sure Doran has already told you that I asked to meet with you myself, and I give you my word. I don't intend to make you pay for your parents' sins. The girl clenched her dress and her jaw, struggling not to cry. She took a deep breath, her lips forming a fragile smile. My family has caused you so much harm, she said in a broken voice. If there's anything I can do. Daenerys smiled and took her hand to guide her to a seat. The girl was so naive, so sweet, that she stirred all her protective instincts. Yet even so, something didn't sit right. Don't worry, little one. You should know I have no plans to harm you, Daenerys said with a reassuring smile. Really? Myrcella looked skeptical but hopeful. Then, why do you want to speak with me? You must understand, Myrcella. I've come to reclaim what's mine. But having your cooperation could prevent a lot of bloodshed. Daenerys explained, your support might keep the West from bleeding. I don't want more war. I just want my family to be safe, she said, voice trembling. But once again, Daenerys felt something was wrong. She nearly frowned, trying to pinpoint the source of her unease. I'll help however I can, Myrcella said, lowering her gaze. I'll write whatever letters you ask, and I'm sure that if you speak with my brother Tommen, he would help you too. Daenerys tilted her head and walked to the fountain, dipping her fingers in the water, thoughtful. Don't you want to save your mother? She asked with apparent curiosity. My mother. She wouldn't allow anyone to save her. She'll say I betrayed her, Myrcella said, holding back tears. She might even demand my death, but avoiding war is the right thing to do. And your brother? Daenerys turned to her, the little one, Tommen. Do you want me to help him? But he's in King's Landing, isn't he? Myrcella replied in a sweet, confused voice. How could you help him? A pause. It's not decided yet, but my husband has plans for him. Plans that will keep him alive and happy. Myrcella offered another smile, firmer this time. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want my brother to be safe. Her tone hadn't changed, but her words were clearer. Silence fell. Daenerys didn't respond. She simply observed the girl for several seconds until she answered. She had finally discovered what had felt out of place. "You're impressive," she said, genuinely admiring her. "What do you mean, my lady?" "I'm not," Marcella murmured. "Few people can say they've fooled me," Daenerys interrupted, "but you, child, are exceptional. I doubt even the legendary faceless men could act as well as you do." "My lady, you're frightening me. If I've offended you, I'm sorry," Marcella replied, trembling again. "Did you know the heart speeds up when we lie? It's uncontrollable. But most don't notice." "I do. Do you know why?" She looked at her intently. "Magic. You've heard the stories about my husband, about me." For the first time, Marcella met her gaze directly. Her eyes were no longer wet or frightened. She had stopped trembling. Her posture straightened, her hands stilled, and color returned to her face. It was like facing a completely different person. "Magic is just as unpleasant as I imagined," she said calmly with an ironic tone, "though I usually picture dragonfire, not something this subtle." Daenerys smiled broadly. "Yes, well, I cheat clearly. But you're impressive on your own. If I hadn't been able to hear you, I'd have believed your act. But you gave yourself away when you didn't lie for once. You truly care about your little brother." "He's all that matters," she said coldly. "If I let my mother keep playing her little games, Tommen will end up dead or worse. You don't believe your mother would harm him, do you?" Daenerys asked, genuinely curious. "If he stands in her way? Without a doubt. If I married one of Doran's sons tomorrow, she'd despise me," she said with disdain. "So you'd rather help me, as long as your brother stays safe?" "I would." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't that sound a lot like treason? Isn't treason what everyone expects from Cersei's children?" Marcella replied emotionlessly. "Let it serve some purpose, then. Let it save Tommen. Let it save me." A thick silence settled between them. Daenerys studied her closely. Marcella remained firm, neither looking down nor smiling. "When did you learn to act like this?" Daenerys finally asked. "I used to eavesdrop. My mother never knows when to stop talking, and my Uncle Tyrion spoke as if children couldn't understand." She replied with a nearly cruel smile. "I learned no one fears the innocent princess. No one wants to kill her. They only want to use her, or own her." Daenerys nodded slowly. She walked to a silver tray and took 2 cups of wine, offering one to Marcella. "You're good." "I almost believed in the trembling, frightened princess." "Sometimes I am," Marcella replied, taking the cup without hesitation. "But never for long." They toasted in silence. Neither drank. "So?" Marcella asked, lowering her cup. "Do you see me as a threat? An ally? An ally? And a blow against my enemies?" Daenerys replied, not looking away. "You'll be Lady of Storm's End." Marcella raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What about Stannis?" she asked, curious. Daenerys nearly laughed. "If Stannis manages to recover after the War of the 5 Kings, he deserves the throne more than anyone. But he won't. He'll die and Storm's End will be yours." "Mine? Not Tommen's?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Don't be paranoid," Daenerys said, amused. "Your brother will be Lord of Casterly Rock. Like I said, we don't harm children. Forgive me if your husband's nickname, the Impaler, doesn't exactly inspire trust," Marcella replied wryly. Daenerys laughed heartily. "You'll learn to appreciate him in time." Then her tone turned more serious. "For now, just keep being what you've always been. The perfect princess. With luck, I'll take you with me when I leave." Marcella simply nodded. She stood, smoothing her dress. "Thank you for receiving me, Your Grace. I hope we can speak again," she said, returning to her sweet and innocent tone. "We will," Daenerys replied. "And believe me, Vlad will love meeting you." The young girl smiled elegantly, offering a flawless curtsy. "It would be an honor," and she walked away lightly. Daenerys watched her go, thoughtful. Then she looked at the wine cup still in her hand, and set it untouched on the table. She had seen many girls pretending to be ladies, but few as dangerous as that one. Chapter 79, Chapter 76. Of gold shall be his crown. Time in King's Landing had passed without major incident for Vlad. He usually stayed close to Oberyn and Illyria, trailing them through the gardens of the Red Keep, attending a few minor feasts, and occasionally visiting select brothels the couple frequented with cheerful nonchalance. As the days went by, his presence became familiar, though his figure still drew whispers from nobles and lingering glances from certain members of the court, both male and female. He had exchanged a brief greeting with Olenna Tyrell, The Queen of Thorns scrutinized him from head to toe with her piercing gaze before returning to her idle chatter with Oberyn. Marjorie showed more diplomacy, offering polite words in the sweet tone she reserved for all guests. Vlad was indifferent. To him, it was all mere theater, with every actor blissfully unaware of how the play would end. During his extended stay in the capital, he gave his progeny precise orders to locate and secure, through cooperation or death, any remaining alchemists or pyromancers in the city. He needed to determine whether wildfire could be effective against both whites and vampires. If so, it would become a strategic resource he needed to control. The day of the wedding arrived without complications. The gardens of the keep were adorned with golden and white ribbons, while the banners of houses Lannister, Baratheon, and Tyrell waved proudly above the treetops. Music flowed constantly, blending with the scent of flowers and wine. The ceremony, officiated by a septon, proceeded as expected. 30 interminable minutes of vows, speeches, and protocol before the final declaration. Let it be proclaimed before gods and men that Marjorie of House Tyrell and Joffrey of Houses Lannister and Baratheon are of one heart, one flesh, one soul. Cursed be anyone who would try to part them, intoned the priest solemnly. With this kiss, I pledge you my love, repeated the newlyweds in unison, as applause erupted and the nobles nodded with varying degrees of sincerity. Hours later, the feast began. The tables overflowed with delicacies. Honey-glazed turkeys, whole roasted stags, pyramids of exotic fruits, and goblets that never emptied. 7 courses were served in honor of the 7, followed by 7 more to glorify the king. Vlad remained at a central table with Oberyn and Ilaria, exchanging few words. He observed quietly, wondering if the evening would unfold as anticipated or if he would need to intervene to silence the little monster king. At one point, Queen Marjorie rose with determination and a charming smile. My love, why don't we make the announcement? Joffrey nodded impatiently, tapping a goblet to gather everyone's attention. Everyone, the Queen wishes to say a few words. We are very fortunate to enjoy this wonderful food and drink. Marjorie began clearly, but not everyone among us is so lucky. To thank the gods for bringing a just end to the recent war, King Joffrey has decreed that the leftovers from our feast be given to the poorest in his city. Applause followed immediately. Some nobles feigned enthusiasm, others seemed genuinely moved by the young queen's piety, and several clapped out of sheer courtesy. Cersei flashed a frosty smile. You are an example to us all, she said in a tone flat enough to leave it unclear whether it was praise or mockery. The hours passed amid wine, laughter, and greetings. Lords paraded before the newlyweds one by one, offering hollow words and rehearsed bows. Your Grace, my king, my queen, said Brienne with an awkward bow. Lady Brienne, how kind of you to come, replied Marjorie, ever courteous. I am no lady, your Grace. Did you just curtsy? Interjected Cersei, raising an eyebrow. Apologies, your Grace. I never mastered protocol. Joffrey, goblet in hand, leaned forward with a cruel spark in his eye. You're the one who stabbed Renly Baratheon. That's not true, my love, Marjorie corrected gently, before the tension could rise. Brienne had nothing to do with it. A shame, Joffrey said coldly, leaning back into his seat. I'd knight the man who ended that pervert's life. Brienne stiffened, but kept her composure. I only wanted to offer my congratulations and wish you both luck. The realm has been at war too long. I hope your reign is long and peaceful. Yes, Joffrey muttered, losing interest as quickly as he gained it. Thank you. I hope we see more of you, added Marjorie with a diplomatic smile. Finally, it was the Dornish party's turn. Oberyn approached with a relaxed step, measured tone, and charming smile. My king, my queen, may this union be long and prosperous. It is an honor for House Martell to witness this occasion, he said politely. Marjorie returned the greeting with elegant composure. You are very kind to have made the long journey from Dorne, my lord. Pity your brother could not attend. Joffrey caught her words and spoke with haughty disdain. Indeed, if I recall correctly, the invitation was for the Prince of Dorne, not his brother. Marjorie could barely conceal the grimace forming on her face. Playing the charming bride became difficult when Joffrey did everything in his power to escalate tension. Cersei, on the other hand, beamed from ear to ear. To her, Dorne was inferior in every way and should be treated accordingly. Unfortunately, my brother's condition has worsened. He can barely move due to his illness, Oberyn said with feigned regret. But as an apology, He sends a gift worthy of his grace, your majesty. It was a beautifully adorned spear, crafted with exquisite detail. Joffrey seemed to remember he was supposed to act like a dignified and measured king. Putting on his best regal expression, he accepted the gift. I understand the circumstances, Prince Oberyn, he said after clearing his throat, as if kind words were a strenuous task. Send him my condolences. I hope his illness improves so we may meet. Nothing would honor him more, your majesty, Oberyn replied with a bow before withdrawing. He returned directly to his table, where Ilaria waited with a kiss and a reassuring smile. Nothing soured Oberyn's mood more than dealing with the Lannisters, especially when he was technically sworn to one. Vlad watched the scene from beside a column, goblet in hand, savoring the spectacle. It was clear that, except for Joffrey, no one was truly enjoying the feast. In the distance, he spotted Grand Maester Pycelle making indecent suggestions to a young servant girl, veiled as a medical inquiry. Vlad had little regard for the old man. He had already ordered an investigation into his possible role in Aerys's madness. Depending on the findings, he would decide whether Pycelle deserved a quick death or not. As she watched him with disgust, Cersei approached him with an irritated expression. After catching the old man groping the girl in a repugnant way, she began arguing with him. Obviously, Margaery's gesture to win the favor of the people had upset her, whether out of jealousy, envy, or pure resentment. She then ordered the old man that, despite what the queen had said, the banquet leftovers were to be sent to the kennels. When Pycelle tried to argue that the queen had given a different order, Cersei cut him off with a voice filled with fury. The queen tells you the scraps will feed the dogs or you will. It was clear she refused to let go of the control she still believed she held over the throne, clinging to her authority. Meanwhile, Oberyn and Ilaria stood to begin the inevitable protocol of greeting the nobles. They moved among the tables where the most important lords of the realm sat, or what remained of them. When he saw Tywin accompanied by his daughter, lingering near the wine table, he couldn't help but approach directly, despite Ilaria's disapproving glance. She disliked her husband's recklessness when it came to the Lannisters, but all she could do was support him. Oberyn approached with an elegant, calm gait, trying to appear casual. Beside him, Ilaria followed with a light smile and a beautiful blue dress that enhanced her features and beauty. Upon reaching Tywin and Cersei, the prince inclined his head slightly in a courteous gesture. Your Grace, Lord Tywin, he greeted with a serene voice. Prince Oberyn, Tywin replied, not bothering to hide his coldness. I don't believe you've had the pleasure of formally meeting Ilaria, Oberyn continued with feigned cordiality. Allow me to present to you the hand of the king, Lord Tywin Lannister, and Cersei Lannister, the former Queen Regent. Lord Hand, Lady Cersei, Ilaria Sand. My lord, my lady. A pleasure, murmured Ilaria with a charming smile and a discreet curtsy. I don't recall ever meeting a Sand before, Cersei commented with barely concealed disdain. We're quite common in Dorne. I have many brothers and sisters, Ilaria replied, the sweetness in her tone fading. Bastards are born of passion, aren't they? Oberyn interjected, trying to lighten the mood. We don't scorn them in Dorne. No? How very tolerant of you, Cersei replied, venom dripping from every syllable. I imagine it must be a relief, Lady Cersei, to be free of royal responsibilities. Oberyn went on with falsely pleasant manners. So many years bearing the weight of the crown must have left your neck a little stiff. I suppose you'll never know, Prince Oberyn, Cersei shot back with a poorly disguised smirk. A shame your elder brother couldn't attend the wedding. Please send him our regards. Tywin interjected, trying to regain control. With a bit of luck, the gout will subside in time and he'll be able to walk again. They say it's the disease of the wealthy, Oberyn observed casually. I'm surprised you don't suffer from it. The nobles in our lands do not live quite the same way as they do in Dorne, Tywin replied, keeping his composure. Oberyn tilted his head slightly, and for a moment, his eyes gleamed with intensity. People everywhere have their differences. In some places, the nobility disapproves of those of low birth, he added, then looked directly at Tywin. In others, the rape and murder of women and children is considered distasteful. Tywin said nothing, but his expression grew colder and more severe. How fortunate for you, former Queen Regent, he said next, this time to Cersei, that your daughter Myrcella was sent to live in the latter kind of place. Oberyn concluded, carefully emphasizing every word. The silence that followed was tense. Cersei pressed her lips together, and Tywin met Oberyn's gaze with calm defiance. Before anyone could say more, Joffrey seemed ready to give a speech. so it was time for everyone to return to their seats. "I believe we've sampled enough wine for today," declared the old lion at last, casting a meaningful glance at his daughter. "If you'll excuse us." Oberyn gave an exaggeratedly polite nod, almost a mockery of court etiquette. "Of course, Lord Hand. We wouldn't want to exhaust your limited appetite for Dornish company." Ilaria discreetly placed a hand on her husband's arm, a light touch loaded with meaning. As the Lannisters walked away, Oberyn watched their stiff backs with a smile that didn't reach his dark eyes. "That was unnecessarily provocative," Ilaria whispered, though her tone held more approval than reproach. "As provocative as sending Gregor Clegane to rape and murder my sister," Oberyn replied quietly, taking the cup his wife handed him. "But you're right. I'll save my finest lines for when you're not there to temper me." Ilaria took a sip of wine, her eyes following Cersei as she crossed the hall with short, furious steps. "That woman's already plotting revenge before she reaches the door." "Good." Oberyn swirled his cup between his fingers, watching the ruby liquid in the torchlight. "Let her try whatever she wants. I've waited long enough for this dance." With a fluid movement, he offered his arm to Ilaria. "Come, my love. We have a party to enjoy." Then, with calm steps, they made their way back to their table to listen to what the king had to say. Obviously, it was unpleasant and in poor taste, like most things that came out of Joffrey's mouth. Chapter 80 Chapter 77 Of Gold Shall Be His Shroud. The murmurs in the hall began to die down when Joffrey rose to his feet, and on the raised dais the little monster dominated the scene on the stage of his own delirium, while at his right Margaery smiled sweetly, and at his left Cersei watched him with pride and a touch of unease, a mixture of feelings only Joffrey could draw from her. He wore his new cloak of arrogance, a deep black embroidered with threads of gold, a gift from Vlad, and since receiving it he had not taken it off. To him it was a declaration that even the most feared bent the knee to him. When he had everyone's attention, he raised his voice. "Silence! Clear the hall," he ordered haughtily. "There has been too much frivolity today, and a royal wedding is no mere entertainment. It is history." Servants began to set up planks and scenery on an improvised stage, while Joffrey announced with excessive pride, "It is time to behold our history, my lords and ladies, and I present to you the kings Joffrey, Renly, Stannis, Robb Stark, and Balon Greyjoy." He paused for dramatic effect before adding, "The War of the Five Kings." A theater troupe emerged from the side of the hall, all the actors in exaggerated costumes, except the one playing Joffrey, who wore finer robes and a golden cloak. The others played Renly, Stannis, Robb, and Balon with ridiculous gestures and outfits, drawing suppressed laughter from the audience, and the performance began with scenes of the Red Keep and the death of Robert Baratheon, exaggerated for comic effect. The actor playing Ned Stark was decapitated by a spring mechanism while the fake Joffrey demanded justice, and subsequent scenes showed ridiculous fights between Renly and Stannis interrupted by Tyrion, culminating with a triumphant entrance of Joffrey seated on an improvised throne as the others bickered. The play continued with Robb declaring the North's independence and Balon demanding the rule of the Iron Islands, while battles with rag dolls and exaggerated falls filled the stage with laughter, and the shift to the Red Wedding was abrupt. Robb with a cardboard sword and a mock bride, while an actor in black portrayed the massacre. When the curtain rose, fake bodies and hanging draperies simulated the tragedy, and the false Robb fled crying, increasing the comic tone of the piece. At the end, the actor playing Joffrey advanced to the center and recited a poem glorifying the young lion, as golden petals fell, and the audience applauded. Joffrey, fully satisfied, tossed a purse of coins to the actor who had portrayed him, failing to perceive the mockery woven through the whole performance. "Well fought. Here is the champion's purse," he announced with a crooked smile, letting the coins jingle across the boards. "Though you are not quite the champion yet, are you?" He turned his gaze over the crowd, delighting in his own voice, and added, "A true champion defeats all challengers, and I'm sure there are others out there who still dare to defy my reign." He paused briefly, faced the crowd, and lifted his cup. "But now that winter approaches, the North and all traitors to the crown will learn the price of their disloyalty." He brought the wine to his lips and drank with a gesture of arrogance, but then he stopped and coughed once, as if the liquid had gone the wrong way, and coughed again, harder this time, his face contorting. "My love?" Margaery asked, rising slightly in her seat, alarmed. "It's nothing," Joffrey stammered before a dry, violent cough cut him off. The cup slipped from his fingers and rolled down the steps of the dais, a dark stain of wine spreading over the marble, and Joffrey staggered, clutching his throat first in annoyance and then in panic, as if trying to tear something out of his windpipe. "He's choking," Cersei shouted, leaping to her feet, her face completely white. "Help the poor boy," Olenna cried. "Idiots, help your king." Jaime shoved his way through the guests with broad shoulders, sending goblets and chairs clattering to the floor. "Stand aside. Let me through." Joffrey collapsed to his knees, his face a deep purple, the veins in his neck taut like cords, clawing at his throat in fury as guttural sounds mixed with bloody foam escaped his lips, writhing on the floor as if his own body had betrayed him. "Joffrey!" shouted Cersei, running toward him, tripping over her skirt with tears already streaming down her face. "Help him! Someone, help him! Breathe!" yelled Jaime, kneeling beside him and trying to hold his head as Joffrey thrashed violently, seeming about to snap his own neck. "Don't touch him," Cersei vociferated, pushing him away in fury. "Don't touch him. Joffrey, please, look at me. I'm here. I'm here." Joffrey opened his eyes with effort, veins bursting beneath his eyelids, and stretched a trembling arm toward his mother, his fingers barely rising before falling lifelessly. Convulsions shook him as he spat a reddish liquid mixed with bile, and then he stopped. Cersei froze. Her son's body lay sprawled on the floor, fingers still curled, nails stained with blood, his mouth slightly open in a final sigh, eyes glassy and lifeless. She threw herself over him, clutching him tightly, hands stroking his face as if she could comfort him, kissing his forehead and cheeks while whispering his name over and over. "My son. My little one. No, please. Joffrey. Please." Her sobs turned into screams and wails, her crying so raw and overwhelming that even the hardest in the hall looked away. Her dress was stained with blood and wine, and she seemed unaware, howling in despair, pounding the floor and her own chest, clutching the body as if she could bring him back to life. Then rage came. She lifted her head, soaked in tears, her face twisted with fury. She stood trembling, fists clenched, hair disheveled, eyes reddened. "Who did this?" she said in a low, hoarse voice, but no one answered. "Who poisoned the king?" she roared, spinning around, glaring at everyone with the same hatred as the guests stepped back. "Bring him to me. Bring me the bastard who did this," she shouted, increasingly unhinged. Tywin Lannister descended from the dais with firm steps, jaw clenched, his face stone-like. He did not cry, but fury burned in his eyes. He stopped beside his grandson's corpse and surveyed the scene with almost inhuman coldness, while the Queen Mother continued sobbing, clutching Joffrey's body, unable to let go. Jaime, at her side, didn't know whether to console her or try to lift the corpse, and Marjorie stood still, covering her mouth with one hand, pale as a statue. "Maester Pycelle," ordered Tywin, his voice controlled but leaving no room for reply. "Prepare the body, and no one touches it without my permission." The elderly maester approached with clumsy steps, stammering, and Tywin turned to Ser Adam Marbrand, commander of the city guard. "Close the gates," he commanded. "No one enters or leaves King's Landing until further notice, neither merchants, nor peasants, nor nobles. No one." "Yes, my lord," responded the knight, pale. "Send men to the harbor." Tywin added brusquely, "Stop every ship, let no vessel set sail, inspect every passenger and every cargo, and if anyone attempts to escape, detain and execute them on the spot." The city guard knights moved swiftly, and the hall's doors closed as some guests let out muffled exclamations. "Guards!" Tywin thundered, pointing. "Escort every guest to their quarters and lock the doors. No one roams the Red Keep tonight without my permission." The orders were followed without delay, and armed soldiers swept into the hall, pushing nobles to escort them, firm but without violence. Outside, the bells began to toll, their sound spreading over the city with the news. Inside the Red Keep, the doors were shut one by one, and the feast hall lay empty, save for the guards, Joffrey's corpse, his mother collapsed beside him, and Tywin standing motionless. He would catch whoever had done this, for it was not only a crime against the throne but a personal affront to his house and the power he had so hard earned, and whoever had done it would pay.